show us how you use coproduction here.
So we've been using co-production quite a lot, but I want to tell you about two things particularly. One of them, we've been developing something called the Accessible Information Standard, which is about how the NHS and social care talks to and communicates with people who have communication needs, so people who have problems with their sight, people who have problems with their hearing, and people who have cognitive processing problems around, so they might have a learning disability or they might process information in a different way. So we've been working with people from Change, people from RNIB, people from Action on Hearing Loss, people from Sense, to involve them in designing what the standard should look like and how the NHS and social care could better meet their needs. So that's one project we've been working on. And the other one is really, they're both really exciting, but we've also been working with people with learning disabilities to recruit a learning disability engagement team. So rather than just working to do to people and tell people things, we wanted to change the way we work. So we employ people with learning disabilities to involve other people with learning disabilities and their families and carers, so that we talk to people in a different way, and we can role model what's possible, so we can get people with learning disabilities into real jobs within an organisation on an equal basis with other people, so that it's more like society should be, instead of people with learning disabilities just volunteering or just being left out of society.
What have you learned from working this way?
Oh, I've learnt loads. I think the most important thing I've learned is I talk jargon a lot. So reminding myself I need to talk in English in a way that my friends and my family and my dad and anybody can understand what I'm saying, instead of some policy wonk nonsense that just makes people sound important but doesn't really mean very much. So I've learnt that. I've also learnt that actually we don't know what we don't know. So I don't have a learning disability. I don't know what it's like to access a service. I don't know what it's like to receive a letter that I can't read. So because I don't know that, it's really important we get people who do know what those experiences are like involved in developing the work, because they see all of the things that people like me don't see. So together we end up with a much better way of working, and we understand more about what it is we're trying to do, instead of guessing what people want. Actually, people know what they want, so they should be involved in making that happen for themselves.
Good. Anything else to that?
Anything else? I think I've learnt a lot of people find it really hard to involve people and to genuinely co-produce, and it's really difficult, and it's a lot slower than it might be otherwise. A lot of the time people want things to happen much faster, but if we do it slowly, there's the hare and the tortoise thing, isn't there? If we do it slowly, we might stand a chance of getting it right, whereas if we rush at things, people don't really understand it, so we leave people behind.
Slow is the best way to get work done.
Slow and steady.
Yes.
And then we all understand it, and we can check that we understand it together, instead of assuming that people... Because I suppose that's the other thing I've really learnt, is not to assume people understand, not to assume people know, but to check and to ask. And if we check and if we ask, we sometimes find out that there's gaps, or we think different things. So what you thought it was like might not be what I thought it was like, but if we check with each other, then we can get it right together. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does make sense, because if you check the work, then I'm assuming it, and you both working together and looking at each right, the information will be spot on.
Yeah.
And that's what we want.
Yeah.
Both working together to make the information accessible for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How has co-production changed your workplace?
Oh, how has it changed my workplace? So, Shaun, some of you and some other colleagues from Change were involved in recruiting our learning disability engagement team. So Katie and Aaron are employed now as co-workers, co-working with Beth and Thomas. And as part of all of that, we've also done a huge, great big away day for all of our directors, about 250 people, and David from Change came along to talk about accessible information, along with a colleague called Hugh from RNIB and Sarah White from Sense, to talk about what it's like for people with multiple sensory communication needs. It's really made people think, because they're involving people or they're working alongside people who perhaps they've never met anybody who's got a visual impairment, or they've never talked to somebody who's got a learning disability, and all of a sudden they can have a conversation with a person, and that's okay. So we often hide in our offices and we don't talk to real people, but this whole process of working together has started to open things out a little bit. There's a lot of work to do though. It's really hard for some people to do that. They're quite scared. If you're not used to working with people, if you're only used to sitting behind a computer, or you haven't had those experiences in your life, it's a very different way of working. And I said before, it takes a long time, and you have to think about things and working at different paces. So our organisation as NHS England, we've got a lot of learning to do about, we've got some really complicated systems. So Katie and Aaron are having to learn how they remember loads of different passwords to get into lots of different systems. So can we make that easier? So we're going through a whole process at the moment of looking at how our policies work to make sure that we can support people to be in employment without unnecessary barriers. So is there a point to having 28 different passwords, or could we perhaps just have one password?
One password would be better.
So there's just something about challenging and changing the way we work, the way we talk, the way we write our emails. So there's something about the way we write to each other. We use really silly fonts that make it really difficult for people to read them, when we could just use a straightforward plain font in a nice size so that it's easier to read. So there's just some really basic things like that we're trying to help people to think through. Why do we do that? Can we change it? Can we make it easier? And then when we do make it easier, everybody likes it.
How has it affect other people working here?
I think it's made people really think about the way they work and the work that they're responsible for. Do they really know what people who might benefit from it might need or want? So is there a different, better way of working? So developing the accessible information standard, having an advisory group that's helped us along the way, and as they've all owned it. It's not ours, it's NHS England's, it's ours together. Everybody's worked on it together, which means that everybody feels responsible for making sure it's successful. So there's a really big understanding between different groups of people about what works and what doesn't work. So that helping people to work together has opened up people's eyes, I think, that there isn't one way, there's lots of ways, and we need to think about lots of ways because people are really different.
Can you give us top tips for co-production?
Top tip for co-production: be honest. Be honest with yourself and be honest with the people that you're working with. So I know I can say to you, Shaun, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you say it again? Or shall we write it down? But checking with people that we are really hearing what each other's saying and that we're understanding what each other's saying. I think too often we make assumptions, and then so I assume or I pretend because I'm a bit embarrassed and I pretend I've understood what you're saying, but you know I haven't understood what you're saying. So if we pretend and we're not genuine, it doesn't work, does it? No. So we've got to be able to be honest with each other, and it's hard. Let's be honest, it's hard to co-produce things, and it's hard to co-work. So some of the stuff that we're working with, the best blog ever, Sarah Marseille and Joanne from Change wrote after they got back from Japan, where they went to work in Japan together on an international exchange trip. and that honesty about how difficult some of this stuff is. So some of the stuff that we're doing together is difficult work. It's difficult for me and it'll be difficult for you. So let's recognise it's difficult and we'll work out what you can do and what I can do and we'll do it together. So it's not about just dumbing it down and just making it super easy and being patronising to people. It's about recognising we can do difficult things together if we're honest and if we share that it's difficult.
I would change the weaknesses.
Yeah, and we've all got weaknesses. Even the most clever people in the world have got weaknesses.
There's human beings out there.
Absolutely. But if we can be honest about that, and actually my weakness you might be really good at, and your weakness I might be able to help with. But unless we recognise that, it's really difficult to work together.
And we can learn from each other.
We can, absolutely. And maybe if we learn from each other, we end up with a better thing at the end.
What is the best things about co-production?
I think the best thing about co-production is seeing something develop and it developing into a better thing than it could ever have been if we'd have just tried to do it on our own. And seeing how developing something together, co-producing something, means that people own it more. So when we developed the Accessible Innovation Standard, we've ended up with a standard that lots of groups of people can go, I recognise that, I understand that, I've been involved in that, and I know how to make it happen because we've done it together. And that is just brilliant. And I think there's also about the learning. I think we're better people when we co-produce things together because we understand each other more.
Because in the past there'd be too much barriers. Now we need to break down all the barriers. Learning disability and non-learning disability are human beings, we're not different.
Yeah, and if we recognise the barriers, we can get rid of some of them.
Yes.
And we can work together on those barriers that are really hard to get rid of. But there might be a barrier for me as well as you. So how do we get rid of that barrier together?
We learn from each other and talk to each other.
Yeah.
Cool.
You did pretty well.
Yay!